am extremely happy at the thought of being the composer in residence at this year's Prague Spring Festival. I'm well aware of the importance of the festival internationally, but also within the Czech Republic. And in fact, I was there once before. I think it was 1989 or 1990, and I have very happy memories of that visit many, many years ago. Well, I am a big fan of Czech music. I like Dvořák very, very much. And I admire also Suk, but my greatest love is Janáček. He's, for me, one of the great composers of the 20th century. And for me, he's one of the greatest opera composers in the history of music. My pronunciation will not be adequate, I'm certain, but I have a fanatical admiration for works like The Cunning Little Vixen, Yennefer, House of the Dead. And for me, though, the work I love the most, and it's really one of my favorite operas, a complete masterpiece, is Katia Kabanova. For me, that is simply one of the most beautiful, powerful and moving operas ever written. So yes, I feel a distant but very strong connection to Czech music. In May, the Ensemble Modern will be playing two pieces of mine. One of them is an early piece written in 1982 called At First Light. It's written for a medium-sized ensemble, 14 players. But the idea was that it was meant to sound like a big symphony orchestra. I wrote it when I was 22. It was written for the famous British group, the London Sinfonietta. The title relates to a magnificent painting by Turner, maybe the greatest of all British painters. And it refers to a magnificent late painting of his, which is, when you see it in the Tate Gallery in London, almost ridiculously luminous. It's quite extraordinary what he was able to do with just paint. And so this piece is in a way a homage to that magnificent image. And then on the second evening, I myself will conduct the first of my 4 operas. In the last 20 years, I've collaborated with the British author, playwright Martin Crimp, and together we have written 4 works now. This is the first one. It's the most modest in scale and the shortest. And it's called Into the Little Hill. And it's a modernization of the famous story of, we call it the Pied Piper of Hamelin, the story of the magic musician who comes to the town to kill all the rats, and then the mayor of the town refuses to pay him, and then he takes away all the children. It's a very, very famous universal story by now. The Ensemble Modern is, without question, one of the great contemporary music groups of Europe, in the world. I had my first opportunity of working with them as a conductor and composer already something like 34 years ago, when I was quite young, and they were quite young. And something happened on that tour that we did, and a connection was made. And it's a connection which has lasted all the years since. And they're really extremely dear to me, as friends, as fellow musicians. I'm as fond of them as personalities, and I admire their vision for music and their adventurousness and their energy. But also, maybe even more, I admire their playing, their hunger to get things right, the incomparable energy that I always feel they give in concerts. It's electric working with them. Well, I started composing extremely young. I fell in love with music very dramatically when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and started to learn the recorder, as everybody did in England in those days. And then quickly moved to the piano, and then started to go to concerts. And my first love for the first, I suppose, 2 years of my classical musical journey was the symphonies of Beethoven. And I was, completely fanatic about them. By the age of 9, I knew all 9 of them off by heart. I had the scores. I even had a piano reduction that I could play. I had records of them. This obsessed my life. Fortunately, I moved on quite quickly to other repertoire. And it's normal for a child, when you love something, when you're extremely enthusiastic about something, to try and do it yourself. So I started composing before I really knew how to notate, before I understood anything about instruments, before I had any knowledge, and kept on going. And here I am now. I was very fortunate that I had some quite wonderful teachers. The first one I will mention is a man called Peter Gellhorn. You will not know his name, but he was a German musician. His teacher knew Brahms, I think, and he came from Berlin to London in the middle of the 1930s, escaping the Nazis. And he was my piano and composing teacher from about the age of 13 till 16. Wonderful musician, refined in taste, extremely high values in terms of technique. Very modest man, but a really superb musician and a wonderful teacher, wonderful teacher. And he then took me to, I really have to say, the greatest of my teachers, who was one of the central figure in my whole life, which was Olivier Messiaen, the great French composer. And I was Messiaen's youngest student at the age of 16, and I stayed with him in Paris for 2 years. And this was an incomparable experience for me. Beyond being a composer of genius and a visionary and incredibly daring composer, he was also the most wonderful and kind, gentle, sweet, and generous man. And then after that, I returned to the UK, and I went to Cambridge, where I studied with Alexander Goer, a very, very important figure, creative and philosophical figure in the musical history of post-war Great Britain. Also, extraordinary teacher, extraordinary person. So those people, fortunately, were fantastically generous and, above all, stimulating for my mind as a young musician. What is my favorite aspect of being a composer and being a musician? Everybody is different. And for some people, composing is smooth and easy. And for me, that's never really been the case, even when I was very young. I've had to be patient, and sometimes pieces can take years to reach their final state. Also, I'm fascinated by detail, and I like for things to be as near as possible to 100% right. And that just takes time to make my mind and my ear clear. So, though there's something wonderful about, for instance, writing an opera, spending 3 years almost not leaving home during such a long period, it's an enthralling experience, but it's not, that's far from a simple and easy life. So when I'm allowed out after I finish my piece, and sometimes when I will perform it, conduct it for the first time, this for me is a great thrill. And when I'm working with musicians like the Ensemble Modern or like the Mahler Chamber Orchestra, who have almost become my family, then this is a moment, can be a moment of ecstatic. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. But I can't do that all the time, because after a few months, you begin to feel, I need to go home and work and write. I couldn't exist without both, I suppose.